Our story begins with the red minotaur charging towards our protagonist. The protagonist then exclaims, "What the hell is a low-rank monster like a minotaur doing down here on the lower floor?" He asks Bayer if he has a plan. Bayer responds, "Yes, I have a plan, but it's just for you." Then, he stabs our protagonist in the back. Due to the injury, the protagonist falls to the ground, bleeding heavily. The protagonist says, "Man, I can't believe you planned to abandon me here from the start." Bayer, smiling, replies, "Well, obviously, right? Who would want to work with a useless person like you?" With that, the protagonist's group starts running, leaving him behind, writhing in pain on the floor. The protagonist begins to scream in anger, but the red minotaur is already right in front of him, ready to deliver a fatal blow. The protagonist dodges the minotaur's initial attacks, lamenting that this might be the end for him. Suddenly, with a powerful strike from the minotaur, the ground collapses, and they both fall to the lower floor. The scene cuts, and when the protagonist opens his eyes again, he realizes that the minotaur's massive body cushioned his fall. He thinks it's only a matter of time before he dies there, either from blood loss or hunger. The protagonist begins to inspect the dead minotaur's body and thinks, "Man, what am I even thinking? What if I tried to eat this monster?" He remembers the miserable life he's led, and suddenly hears a voice saying, "Listen well, child. No matter how hard and painful it gets, you must never give up on your life." With that, the protagonist stands up and brutally devours the minotaur. It's said that if a human exhausts all their energy, they must eat monster meat, rich in mana. The mana particles invade the protagonist's body, replenishing his lost blood and satisfying his hunger, bringing about an unexpected transformation. The protagonist gains a skill called Thunder Roar, which intimidates all opponents in the area. He also gains the physical enhancement ability, temporarily boosting his strength. The protagonist begins to scream and attack everything around him, attracting the attention of other monsters. The protagonist says, "They're all coming in swarms. Well, which one of us is getting eaten now?" It's said that this is the adventure of a solitary person who broke some taboos. By devouring the red minotaur, the huge cut on the protagonist's back begins to heal. A giant aura appears around the protagonist, and it's said that he has acquired the Batilla's ability. The monsters in the dungeon observe the protagonist. A noble's diary once said that devouring monsters is taboo, as the human absorbs the monster's evil essence. The first symptom is insane euphoria, followed by physical strengthening, headache, nausea, poisoning, and finally, sudden death. The protagonist, killing all the monsters, promises revenge against his former group. If the person doesn't die, a rare thing can happen. They can transform into a monster. After devouring other monsters, the protagonist unlocks the abilities of evaluation, echolocation, and absorption. He faces a giant snake, uses the lightning cloak, and electrocutes it, gaining the poison mist ability. He continues killing other monsters, gaining web manipulation after defeating a spider. Exhausted, he says he thinks he can stay alive, but many more monsters start appearing. The protagonist then looks at all those monsters and says, "Man, you've got to be kidding me. God is trolling me, but I will definitely make it back home alive." The scene then shifts to the border town of Bologna, a territory housing several labyrinths, including the Miasma Labyrinth. The dense haze of this labyrinth continues to affect the vision of all adventurers who pass through it. The protagonist says, "All the other adventurers always hated this labyrinth, but I always visit it. Before I knew it, I was being called the Miasma Scavenger." The protagonist then reaches a plantation and comments that there was a lot of miasma today, and he was on the 6th floor of the dungeon. Miasma is a grass with purifying effects and is an irreplaceable source of income for the protagonist. After all, everyone needs to make money. The protagonist says, "Well, I won't pick much this time, just enough for 3 days." Suddenly, a few rats appear beside the protagonist. He comments that they are called miasma rats, and many of the monsters living there use miasma and are toxic, contributing to the reason adventurers don't like going to that place. But against the protagonist, it simply doesn't work, as he passes through the poison smoke easily and starts slicing all the rats in half. After stabbing one, another jumps onto his arm, almost biting his face. Suddenly, the rat starts to glow golden inside a sphere of energy and explodes right in front of the protagonist. Suddenly, a group of adventurers arrives and says, "Wow, a lost guy." Another one comments, "That's why I told you not to use all your power before getting closer." The protagonist thinks, "I think I've seen these guys at the Adventurers Guild many times." A girl extends her hand to the protagonist, apologizing and asking if his name is Rudd, saying she noticed he was fighting and just wanted to help. The protagonist gets up by himself and says, "I appreciate the sentiment, but it would be nice if you gave a warning before blasting power in my face." The man responds, "That's why I yelled fireball, right?" The chubby one comments, "The miasma colony really was here, and the group says they were lucky to find it." The protagonist realizes and says, "So you followed me here because you wanted to see my harvest." The shortest and cockiest member of the group responds, "We're just adventurers making a living in this labyrinth, and by mere coincidence, we found you here, saving your life. You must be the miasma scavenger who can't even say a proper thank you." The group, with malicious looks, starts drawing their weapons to attack the protagonist. Seeing the situation, the protagonist had no choice. He apologizes for doubting their words and thanks them for saving his time. The scene then shifts to Bologna. At the Full Belly restaurant, the protagonist is there, lying on the floor, and one of the guys says, "You miasma scum, every time you're here at the restaurant, the smell makes the food taste awful." He continues, "You're doing this because it seems like you can't use your head. An adventurer is someone capable of defeating monsters, but you, with that useless ability, nullification, are not a real adventurer. In fact, you're just trash." It's explained that nullification is the protagonist's only ability, useful for exploring miasma labyrinths, but inadequate for defeating monsters, big or small, which is the most vital thing for an adventurer. Since he has no combat abilities, he was never welcome at parties and was named the miasma scavenger for seeking out low-level items inside that miasma labyrinth. In other words, due to the protagonist's flawed abilities, he is seen as a fraud by other adventurers. He's already an adult man, but unfortunately, he still has to fight life and death battles against mere rats. Lying in his bed, he wonders if he can really continue living his life like this, being a miasma scavenger. The scene then shifts to the Adventurers Guild. The protagonist enters and says he needs to find another colony as soon as possible while he still has some money. He enters the room and wonders, what's going on here? It seems much noisier today. The protagonist approaches the receptionist and asks, "Do you have any good requests today?" The woman responds, "You're the miasma hunter, aren't you? So, kid, a new labyrinth has been discovered." This makes the protagonist very excited, and the woman continues, "This new place is filled with various treasures and unity magic, a golden opportunity for any adventurer." The protagonist thinks, "So that's why it's so noisy here today." The woman adds, "Oh, and about the miasma herb you usually hunt, from today on, its price will drop a bit." The protagonist is outraged. Why is the miasma price dropping so much? The woman explains, "The miasma labyrinth has never been so popular, and since people will go to the new labyrinth, there won't be demand." She continues, "The new labyrinth is in the Avelio Mountains, but entry is not allowed." The protagonist asks, "Why is entry not allowed?" She replies, "The exploration requirement for the new labyrinth is being rank D or higher, and you, Rudd, are rank A, so you're not qualified to enter." This frustrates the protagonist greatly. He says he really wants to dive into this new labyrinth since he has nothing left to lose, and asks if there's any way to get in. The woman responds, "Those are the rules, kid. Even if you go there, you'll just end up dying in vain." Suddenly, a blonde man appears behind the protagonist and says, "If you want to go to this place so badly, why not join my group as a porter?" The scene shifts to a carriage, where the protagonist is with the blonde man's group, ready to go to the new labyrinth. The man says it's great to have met the protagonist, and that he needed someone to carry the materials from the new labyrinth, but couldn't hire anyone in time. The protagonist thinks this probably happened because all the guild's adventurers are gathered at the new labyrinth, making it really hard to find a porter. The girl in the group asks, "Why are we diving with a miasma scavenger?" Another member replies, "Couldn't you have found someone better?" The blonde man, smiling awkwardly, says, "Oh, guys, don't say that. He's been an adventurer for a long time. Isn't it better to have someone with a lot of travel experience than a newbie by our side?" He continues, "Let me introduce myself again. My name is Bayer, leader of the Scarlet Sword. Those two over there are Rick and Sasha, and the three of us are D-rank adventurers." The protagonist says, "My name is Rudd. I'm E-rank, and it's a pleasure to work with you." Bayer then says, "Before we dive into this mission, I'd like to know more about your stats. Can you show me your guild card?" The protagonist responds, "All right, I'll show you." He says, "Guild card, open," and all of his stats appear. Bayer is interested since the protagonist can even use fire magic, and the protagonist explains, "The powers are too weak for battle, but they can be useful in dark places or for cooking." Bayer laughs and says that is indeed useful, and that he's counting on him. The scene shifts again, and they finally arrive at the entrance of the newly discovered labyrinth. The girl says, "Looks like we're the first to arrive," and another comments, "Let's explore it quickly before more adventurers show up." However, when they open the door, they see it is already crowded with adventurers everywhere. The girl starts yelling, "It's going to be awful with all these annoying adventurers bothering us." Bayer says, "It seems the first layer has already been overexplored." Rick suggests, "Shouldn't we dive deeper? There should be fewer people there." Sasha happily agrees, saying they will do just that. The protagonist says, "That's not quite right. This is a newly discovered labyrinth. Wouldn't it be better to start mapping the first layer?" The girl responds, "I can't believe I'm hearing this from a porter. That's why you're such a low and insignificant rank." Bayer intervenes, "It's It's best to give up. Rudd doesn't really present any significant damage, and I agree with both of you. If we keep going like this, we won't get good results, so we'll have to go deeper into the labyrinth. They reach the 4th layer of the Avelio labyrinth, and as soon as they step there, a wolf attacks the protagonist. Rick arrives and bashes the wolf's head, mocking the protagonist and telling him not to be afraid of such small things. Sasha then uses an electricity power and electrocutes the wolf, while Bayer slices the other wolves in half with his sword. The protagonist is amazed, seeing that everyone there was really strong, and he couldn't even move a finger to help because he was paralyzed with fear. Sasha comments that diving deeper is really the right way to do it, especially without other people around. Bayer agrees, saying the monsters there weren't extremely strong and that they even found some treasures along the way. Rick then starts yelling at the protagonist, ordering him to collect the materials from the monsters he defeated. The protagonist responds that he can't collect the materials from those monsters because they are too damaged and their magic stones are likely shattered. Rick says, "But what if they're not shattered? You useless idiot. You better not push your luck. This group is full of losers. Man, I can't believe this." The protagonist remembers how Rick killed those monsters and knows he can't confront him. He says, "All right, I'll try to collect them then." The protagonist approaches one of the wolves that Rick destroyed and observes, "Why is this thing's body completely disfigured and crushed like this? Its guts are all over the place, and the smell is horrible." The protagonist thinks it's best to burn the body a bit first and starts doing so. Rick, pestering the protagonist, says, "Hey, old man, what are you doing burning that monster? Do you think I'm going to eat that rotten meat? Although I've been exploring for a while now, and I'm starting to get hungry. Even that horrible monster meat is starting to look delicious to me." Sasha responds, "Man, you're so disgusting. That's gross. Among adventurers, it's taboo to eat monsters since their mana would be absorbed into our bodies. Who knows what would happen to us if we ate that?" Rick says, "Well, I was joking. You take everything too seriously. When we get back, I'll use the money we earn to eat all the delicious food I want." Just as Rick said that, they all felt an incredibly high mana, so sinister it left everyone horrified. When they looked back, they saw it was a minotaur. The protagonist, in shock, realized that this monster was rank B, far superior to him and even to his group. He could only wonder what a rank B monster was doing in such a shallow layer. Sasha said it would be impossible to face such a monstrosity. So what could they do at that moment? Bayer then said he would use a skill and asked Rudd to lend him his backpack as quickly as possible. Bayer shouted for Rudd to keep his movements slow. The protagonist asked if Bayer had a plan for that absurd situation. With a malicious smile, Bayer replied, "Of course, I have a plan, and a fine one at that." He then drew his sword and made a huge cut across the protagonist's back. The protagonist fell to the ground, writhing in pain, unable to believe what had just happened. Bayer asked Rick to activate his haste ability, which doubled the target's speed. The protagonist realized that from the beginning, they had brought someone into the group just to abandon them in case something happened. Bayer said, "Why do you think we brought a failure like you, who is only good for gathering miasma?" They then left the protagonist there to die. The Minotaur began brutally attacking the protagonist, who could only think that he would unfortunately die there, with nothing he could do. The Minotaur was pummeling the protagonist mercilessly. I don't even know how our protagonist didn't die from the first blow. As the Minotaur slammed him into the wall with a shoulder charge, suddenly, they broke through the wall and fell into a gigantic crater. When the protagonist opened his eyes, he thought he was already dead, but realized he had fallen onto the Minotaur's body, which had cushioned the fall a bit. However, this didn't mean much, as he was severely injured, bleeding profusely, and had no chance of survival. The protagonist thought it was only a matter of time before he lost his life, whether from blood loss, hunger, or some other cause. He was very hungry and needed to eat something before dying. Looking at the dead Minotaur, he began to think he could eat the monster, but imagined this could lead to an even greater disaster. He reflected on his miserable life until he started hearing a voice saying, "Listen well, child. No matter how hard or painful your life is, you must never give up." With those words, the protagonist stands up with hatred in his heart and begins to brutally devour the Minotaur. As he eats the monster's flesh, he thinks that if an exhausted human eats the meat of a monster rich in mana, the mana particles would invade his body, transforming him into something worse than death. But the protagonist had nothing left to lose and starts tearing into the monster to regain his lost blood and satiate his hunger. Rudd takes a gamble, resulting in an unexpected transformation in his body. After devouring the entire Minotaur, the protagonist walks through the labyrinth, carrying the axe he took from the Minotaur. His expression no longer seemed human. A group of monster bats attacks the protagonist, who activates a skill called Roar, intimidating all opponents and tearing apart those nearby. He also activates the physical enhancement skill, which boosts his strength. The Minotaur's axe glows like like magma, and the protagonist starts slicing through the remaining monsters, eating their corpses. After eating the bat's flesh, he gains a new skill called echolocation, which detects creatures around him, effective in darkness. Activating the skill, he senses many monsters nearby. If it had been the protagonist from minutes ago, he would have been terrified, but now he was different. He thinks, well, they're coming in swarms, so let's see who's going to eat whom now. The protagonist begins to tear through all the monsters in front of him with absurd brutality, seemingly having lost his humanity. The protagonist says the axe finally fits perfectly in his hand, and that he can feel the monster's magic without even looking at them. He is somewhat out of control, enjoying his power, and starts killing more monsters. He even grabs a monster's eye and starts devouring it. The more he eats pieces of the monsters, the more he feels an unimaginable power flowing through his body. With each monster he devours, he becomes more aggressive and intense. Now, the ones starting to feel fear are not the protagonist, but the monsters. After a massacre of monsters, the protagonist manages to escape the labyrinth. Seeing the blue sky, he says, well, I finally managed to survive at least once in my life alone, and starts shouting and celebrating his feat. The scene then shifts back to the Adventurers Guild. Everyone there seems surprised, and a man at the front says, well, after hearing your report, I gathered all the adventurers who were in the labyrinth, except for Rudd, who went with you. This man was from the Bologna branch, and was actually a guild master named Lan Carsi. Bayer's trio was pretending to be concerned about Rudd, with Bayer almost crying. When we encountered the Minotaur on the 4th floor, he was unfortunately killed before we had a chance to protect him. Sasha even pretended to cry, showing an impressive performance. The guild master says, unfortunately, I understand the situation, so for now, I'll prohibit entry to the new labyrinth. Suddenly, the receptionist, who was feeling down, is surprised to see someone at the door. When everyone looks back, they see that it is Rudd, the protagonist, entering. Everyone exclaims, no way, how is this kid not dead? Rudd's return shocks Bayer's group. Bayer, very insincere and shameless, hugs the protagonist, asking if he is alright. He gets close to Rudd's ear and whispers, if you say anything unnecessary in front of everyone, I will definitely kill you here. All the group's false members ask if the protagonist is injured, saying they went back to look for him, but the labyrinth was already closed. Bayer then says, guys, anyway, let's celebrate our dear friend's survival. But of course, let's not celebrate in a place like this, right, Rudd? When Bayer touches the protagonist's shoulder, he feels something strange, as he couldn't move a muscle. The protagonist, very serious, shouts for everyone to hear, these bastards used me as a pawn, scaring everyone present. Bayer, embarrassed, asks, Rudd, what are you talking about? Why are you saying that? The guild master interrupts, boy, what do you mean by being used as a pawn? Without hesitation, the protagonist responds, Bayer stole all my supplies and attacked me from behind. Rick used his skill to lure the monster to me, and Sasha used a speed skill for the three of them to escape and leave me behind. Bayer, locked in fear, desperately tells the guild master that they did nothing of the sort, claiming that Rudd was hallucinating from the blow. The guild master, looking at a person entering through the door, says, now we will clarify the truth. A small woman with white hair, looking like a sorceress, enters the room, leaving everyone surprised. She was an officer of truth, who rarely left the royal capital. The guild master explains that due to the unusual number of deaths among temporary porters, he brought the officer of truth. He then asks the officer, please respond to the complaints from Bayer and Rudd. Could you verify the truth of this story and tell us who is being honest? The officer removes the cloth from her mouth and says, the members of the Scarlet Sword are lying. She raises her staff, which emits an intense light around everyone, and declares Rudd's complaints are entirely true. Everyone is impressed by her statement, and whispers begin about Bayer's group's motives. Bayer, not taking the situation well, starts to go mad and says, how could a spoiled little girl like you know something so precisely? The guild master responds, this little girl has the truth ability, a skill impossible to obtain later in life, rivaling even unique abilities. Absolutely no lie, not even from the world's greatest liar, can pass through this ability. He continues, what could be more reliable than the words of someone who dedicated this great power to her country to help all the wronged people? Who do you think I would believe? Boy, the guild master says, abandoning a comrade during an expedition, adventure, or in labyrinths is a huge taboo among adventurers. And not just that, you intentionally threw your comrades to die as pawns. Even if everyone here continues investigating your crimes, it's certain that your adventure certification will be revoked. All of you will be reduced to slavery, and rightly so. Sasha begins to have a severe anxiety attack, crying and saying that this can't be possible. Rick, the toughest one, says, man, you must be kidding me. How can you do this to us? Bayer, the most outraged, says, how can someone as talented as me become a slave? This doesn't make any sense. He looks at at the officer of truth with hatred and says, "If this meddler weren't here, no one would have ever discovered my foolproof plan." Blinded by rage, Bayer charges with his sword to attack the girl. He was so distraught that he didn't care about all the witnesses to the atrocity. This action surprised the protagonist, the guild master, and the officer of truth. But with incredible speed, the protagonist dashes forward and protects the girl with his sword, leaving Bayer shocked at the agility of someone of a lower rank. The protagonist, with a fierce look, says, "Don't you dare touch the officer of truth with your filthy hands." Bayer couldn't believe that Rudd had stopped his attack. The protagonist then delivers a punch so powerful that it sends Bayer flying, creating a massive crater in the wall. Sasha and Rick are impressed by the protagonist's strength, especially since they were the ones who mocked him the most in the labyrinth. The protagonist says, "Well, I guess I overdid it. That wasn't very good." The guild master takes the protagonist to the reception room and says, "Sorry to bother you, kid, but we need to talk a bit. I know you're tired, but I hope you understand." The protagonist responds that it's all right because this is very important. The guild master explains that the three will be taken by the reconnaissance team, interrogated, and if confirmed that they used porters as bait, they will lose all their positions and qualifications as adventurers and be reduced to slavery. Bayer went as far as to defy the officers of truth, so he probably won't be seen again. Anyway, they will lose the rights to the profits obtained in the new labyrinth. It's only fair that you receive all of this. There are about 200,000 Regins in this bag, so please accept it. The protagonist leaves the room with the bag full of money, very happy, thinking that he could cover all his expenses. Earning that much money by capturing miasma grass would take more than a century. He realizes that adventurers can really make a lot of money. Looking around, he notices that no one is insulting him, perhaps because they saw what he did to Bayer. This doesn't mean they will be kind, but he thinks, if I stand out more, some will think I'm rising too quickly, which will be suspicious. So, I guess I should continue making money in the miasma labyrinth, just like before. The protagonist says to himself, I need to stop being sad and do something about it. I finally got some significant money. I'll prepare all my equipment and eat whatever I want. But first, I'll head to the tool shop. He comes across a bag and wonders if it's really magical. Changing his mind, he says, well, I think I'll grab something to eat first. The scene then advances to the next few days. The protagonist is in the middle of a mine, killing a bunch of monster rats. He thinks, who would have thought they could be defeated so easily? And to think I had to escape from 5 of them to avoid dying a few days ago. The protagonist then activates one of his skills, called evaluation, and starts analyzing the dead rat's body. He notes all the attributes of the monster and realizes that the skill he gained from eating those monsters can be used on corpses. Seeing the rat's level, he thinks, I wonder how much my level has increased now. Since I killed that rat so easily, I must be around level 20. The protagonist then checks his status and sees that he is an E rank, level 42, which shocks him because he had advanced so much. He was level 7 the day before. This is very rare. I need to see what skills I've acquired, he thinks, opening his skills section. He has so many skills that they don't fit on the screen. The protagonist is thrilled with all of this, as he went from a complete failure to someone extremely powerful. The protagonist looks at the wall that was broken during the fight with the red minotaur, now sealed. The labyrinth will probably remain closed for a long time. He had planned to slowly explore the miasma labyrinth, but now he wants to test his new skills in the deeper floors. He also wants to test the bag he bought, not even knowing if it was magical. I want to choose the right monster for my first try. I'll go to the 6th floor, he says. The protagonist descends floor by floor, slaughtering monsters along the way. After passing through several floors and killing many monsters, he reaches the 24th floor and encounters a humanoid lizard. The protagonist activates the evaluation skill again and sees that the monster is level 25, from the dragon tribe race, lizard soldier. They usually fight in coordination with their companions, but there's only one here. That's strange. It might be worth trying to kill it, he thinks. Without thinking twice, the protagonist charges with his sword to cut the lizard's neck, but the lizard notices the attack and dodges, resulting in a cut on its arm. You're not too bad, but next time, I won't miss, says the protagonist. As he considers his next move, the lizard flees into a dead-end alley. Now you have nowhere to escape, says the protagonist, but realizes it was a trap. There were more lizards with it. Worried, the protagonist thinks he was too confident. Even with a vast difference in level, the situation was dire. The lizards begin to attack, but he dodges easily. If that's the case, I'll take them down one by one, the protagonist thinks. He focuses on one lizard, but is interrupted by another that throws him aside. Another lizard nearly hits his head. That was close. Almost got me, he says, smiling. The protagonist sees many lizards around him and wonders how many there are. Observing the situation, he hears a loud sound and notices a distinct lizard in the back. Using evaluation. He sees that it is the Lizard General, level 32. Ah, I finally found their leader. So you're the boss, he thinks. The Lizard General begins to shout, and all the other lizards start attacking the protagonist insanely. The protagonist activates his physical enhancement skill and starts beating up all the lizards that jump at him, crushing one's head with a stomp and using the momentum to attack the general. The protagonist lands a full sword strike on the general's chest, but is shocked to see that nothing happened. The general, wasting no time, prepares to attack the protagonist point blank. The protagonist thinks he can't avoid the blow at that distance and activates his steel body skill. He says, "You're not the only one with tricks up your sleeve, huh, Captain?" The protagonist wonders about the lizard's power that prevents it from being hurt and uses evaluation again to understand the enemy's abilities. He discovers that the general has skills in one-handed swordsmanship, shield technique, miasma resistance, and command. Confused, the protagonist realizes that the general doesn't have any durability enhancement skills. Observing the skills of the other lizards, he notes that they all have swordsmanship and miasma resistance, but no special abilities. So, where is this resistance coming from? Suddenly, he sees a lizard with a cut across its chest. Investigating the skills of this lizard, he finds that it has a skill called Substitute. The protagonist realizes that this lizard was taking all the damage. Without hesitation, he pierces the lizard's abdomen and says, "It must be tough being a substitute, but don't take it personally." The general, furious, charges at the protagonist along with the other lizards. The protagonist uses his thread manipulation skill and leaps, saying, "When they gather like this, it makes things much easier." He throws all his threads over the lizards, trapping them at once. Reaching the lizard general, the protagonist says, "Looks like the victory is mine." Without a second thought, he decapitates the general. After killing all the general's subordinates, the protagonist thinks, now, it's finally time to eat. He takes out the magical bag he bought with the guild money and begins pulling out various cooking utensils. Instead of weapons or armor, he pulls out spices and kitchen equipment. The protagonist thinks, "When I was desperate to survive, I really wanted to try this." He starts skinning the lizard meat, slicing it into various pieces, and then calmly fries the meat. He wonders if properly cooking and eating the monster's meat will allow him to gain skills or better abilities. Salivating with hunger, he begins to eat the lizard meat and comments, "Who would have thought monster meat would be this delicious? I might actually be getting addicted to monster meat," thinks the protagonist. He then gains the lizard skills: one-handed swordsmanship, shield technique, miasma resistance, and command. "I got new skills, but how can this meat be so good? Could it be related to the magical powers the monsters possess? The Minotaur's abilities and the spider armor have been very useful, but I still haven't tried the Thunder Wolf and Black Serpent skills. It's fine. I don't need to rush now. On the way back, I can try eating more varieties of monsters." The scene then shifts to the 21st floor, where the protagonist sees wasps and poisonous frogs. He activates his lightning skill, electrocuting everything in his path. This lightning skill is very useful for sweeping away multiple monsters at once, he comments. He notes that those monsters can infect people with diseases, but they chose the wrong opponent. The protagonist takes out his frying pan, saying now he has frog and insect meat and it's time to eat. He grills the meats, commenting that the frog's venom makes the meat tenderer and tastier, and the seasoning reminds him of morcella. He wishes he had a beer to go with it. After eating, he gains new abilities: poison, temperature variation, powder scale poison, paralysis powder scale, and aerial slice. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a noise behind him, like a fall and a human voice. Could there be other adventurers here? He wonders. It's rare to see other adventurers in combat, and if I'm lucky, I can exchange information with them. The scene changes to a group of adventurers, where a woman lies on the ground, stabbed. One of the men says, "Damn it, I can't believe she still had so much magic left." Another man comments, "But all this trouble was worth it." He pulls the hood off the woman, revealing an elf. "How much is an elf worth?" he asks. The protagonist appears behind them and says, "I had some hope of making a few adventure friends." Everyone is startled and turns around. "I don't know the whole story, but I can't stand by and watch a woman being attacked cowardly," says the protagonist. One of the men with a scar over his eye asks who he is. The protagonist responds with a smile, "I'm just an adventurer." The elf shouts for the protagonist to leave quickly, explaining that those men are not ordinary adventurers, but adventurer hunters. "Adventurer hunters? Huh, I've heard they're high-level adventurers," comments the protagonist. He sees the men's levels: 55, 52, 56, 58. This startles him, as he didn't expect such strong opponents. He wonders if they have concealment skills or tools against magic. The man with the scar over his eye, who has the highest level, orders his henchmen to capture the protagonist.